Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville and this is my critique of the Muhle Glashutte M99 City. The first Muhle Glashutte I owned, the first I'm going to critique, the first German watch I've owned or really critiqued seriously. Hope you enjoy it. I always start these critiques with just a bare bones description of what it is we're talking about. So we've all got the same sort of starting point. This is the Muhle Glashutte M99 City, reference number M1-99-41. The genre, it's a sports watch, I would call it. K-shaped, nice simple round, dial, a blue with applied indices, heavily textured, heavily contoured, steel case and bezel, sapphire crystal, 100 meters water resistance with a screw down crown. Functions comes with time and date, hacks, hand winds, 38 hours power reserve. The movement, if you hadn't guessed it from the functions, is a modified SW200. It is modified very extensively, so we'll talk about that more later. Now, just so that you understand and you've got a sort of a realistic idea of what you can expect from quality and where this is likely to be, today you'll be paying around about $700 to $1,100 US for this watch. It's a little bit tricky because this watch is actually no longer in production. Started manufacture in the year 2000, went out of production in 2016. Now, with the description out of the way, normally what I do here is what I call an interpretation section. So this is really just talking about the brand itself and the aims the brand had for this watch, what they were out to achieve. Okay, so Muhle Glashutte is a long-time family company. Originally founded in Glashutte in 1869, the business has had a lot of changes and it's taken a lot of punches through its life, whether those are expropriations of the business under communists or whether it was a lawsuit which basically saw the company have to fight back from the edge of bankruptcy. But despite all of those changes, despite all of those punches, the company has had a couple of things that has consistently run through it. The first is the Muhle name and family. This has always been associated with the Muhle family, and they've always had that Muhle or mill association with their name. This is a company which has actually come to timepieces quite late. But it has always had a focus on precision engineering and manufacturing. It's always been working in and around the nautical instrument, timekeeping, tool making, measurement areas of the industry. Another little interesting quirk is this Muhle has been, in its various incarnations, it's routinely been a business-to-business supplier for most of its existence. Now, the company, as I said, has been through a number of iterations. The company really locked in on its current form in 1990, not long after the wall came down and those companies which had been sort of shuttered away in Eastern Europe were able to join the Western Europe and the rest of the marketplace. It locked in on being an actual watchmaker in 1994, and those original watches really did lean heavily on this whole business-to-business provider of professional hardcore tools, which was what Muhle had been doing for the last 100 and something years. 6 years after that, though, they came out with this watch, which is really taking all of that history and then takes it and puts it in a watch for everyday consumers to wear in anything they're going to get, anything they want to do. Muhle's own literature and their own descriptions of this watch describe it as an SUV. I would say they're really aiming for like that luxury family SUV, trying to do it all, frankly, provide rugged sportiness, but also a hint of elegance or flair. So that's a little bit about the company. That's a little bit what the company is trying to achieve with this watch. Now let's have a look at the watch and see how they went. We'll start by just having a look at the looks of the watch. And the first thing I think you'll note is that the marine chronometer feel, that kind of marine instrument history of Muhle really shines through. That multi-layered dial, the super precise minute track, the way the bezel is shaped and engraved, even just that simple round case with those short business-like lugs, all of course hanging off this massive anchor chain of a bracelet, to me just scream nautical instrument. However, this is all contrasted with a surprising amount of flair. That vibrant, I think, royal blue dial with super fine cut grooves and subtle contours really say more than just simple tool. Combine that with brilliant sparkling indices and hands, and these little Muhle or mill markings kind of scattered here and there really start to lift the watch up. The case and the lugs are very simple, but take that really thin mid case and some little flourishes like the addition of the lines top and bottom of that mid case and the slight shaping to give you those claw lugs really again takes what could have been simple, boring and perhaps a little slab-sided and, if you like, rescues it and makes it more luxurious, more fun, more interesting. I would say from a looks point of view, there's really only one flaw in this ointment, and that is this kind of triple horn, half integrated kind of bracelet attachment. From a looks perspective, that creates this weird filler between the case and the lugs, and which results in some odd looks at some angles. I would note that it also means that the owner is going to be really restricted in strap choices moving forward. Now, mine came on a bracelet, and that bracelet is certainly engineered to last, and it's very comfortable. So I'm going to be fine. But I think if you had it on a band, that could be more problematic, given that no band lasts forever. Now, in terms of build, all I can say is the build of this watch is executed superbly. My watch is an early example from around about 2000, which makes it coming up on 21 years old, and it remains beautiful. The bits which are supposed to be polished are still really nicely polished. The bits that are supposed to be satin are still silky and smooth. The printing is remarkably crisp and clean with virtually no errors that I can find, even under macro. Everything is machined and milled and screwed, not to perfection, but to a level of professionalism that goes far beyond what I expected. It's kind of like if you imagine a really skilled and professional craftsman made himself a watch to wear on special occasions. That's kind of how I see this watch coming through. That sort of comes, that feel of a professional craftsman doing the best job he can, to me really comes through with this whole watch. I said earlier that the movement is an original Sellita base caliber but heavily modified. There's a tendency to kind of poo-poo or be dismissive of watches built on ETA or Sellita bases. For me, that's kind of, I like to look at those watches kind of like you might look at a Chevy small block motor. Yes, you can get a Chevy small block, which is pretty anemic, comes with 180 horsepower, and all in all is entirely unremarkable. Take that same motor, blueprint it, balance it, raise the compression ratio, stick some high flow heads on it, massive plenum, fuel inject it, and suddenly you've got a 300, 400 horsepower powerhouse of a race motor. You can do exactly the same to a Sellita or ETA movement, and what I would say is Muhle's gone a long way down that path. Yes, it began life as an SW200, but that movement has been completely disassembled every component blueprinted. There's been a new regulation assembly designed and installed, new rotor, some finishing, and then the whole thing has been regulated in 6 different positions. To be honest, I think apart from those guys who add like whole new complications on top of these movements, there's not a whole lot more you could do to make that base movement into a pretty high performance motor, essentially, and that's what they've done. Now, I don't normally talk about bracelets. It's not something I worry about much because they're just a replaceable part of the watch. But given that this is integrated, I will talk about it a bit more now. The first thing is it is really heavy duty. It's a very heavily spec'd watch, bracelet. It's got this really nice kind of just mid polish all the way through. So it's not, I wouldn't call it a satin finish, but it's a very light polish. And it gives, all in all, it has a really nice balance of detail that I think nicely complements the case. It doesn't, I think something like a Beads of Rice or a Jubilee would go too far. It would kind of be too frilly for the otherwise workmanlike case. I think this kind of oyster style, I think it is, bracelet complements the simplicity of the case beautifully. A common phrase I use, now we're going to talk about wearability. Now, a common phrase I use with watches is that they're not sculptures intended to be hung on a wall. They don't come to life. You can't really know what they're like until you talk about wearing them. So, and for me, wearability comes down to 3 things: fit, feel, and presence. Fit is decided by essentially one measurement, the lug-to-lug distance. Now, this thing comes with a 44mm lug-to-lug, which means it will fit pretty much any adult wrist, unless you've got particularly small, almost childlike wrists. This is a watch you can wear. Feel is interesting. Feel, I think, for a watch is defined by a couple of different things. It's defined by the thickness of the watch. It's designed by the location of the spring bars or the bracelet / band attachment points, and it's also defined by how the base of the watch is shaped. This watch is nice and thin, 11mm overall. Those lugs are curved down very aggressively, and the spring bars, so the bracelet attachment point is nice and low. That bracelet articulates beautifully, and the base of the watch itself is the case back to mid case, if you like, edge is really quite heavily chamfered. Take all of that and the watch feels brilliant on your wrist. The other thing I would say, and I don't know how they did it, given that the watch head is not particularly heavy, but the bracelet is, in this case, balance also becomes important, given that it is an integrated bracelet and hard to change out. And as I said, I don't know how they did it, but this watch feels beautifully balanced on the wrist. The other thing I would note is, despite being a butterfly clasp, which means you can sort of lose out on adjustments, I absolutely nailed a perfect fit with this. So I'm either extremely lucky, or those little 5mm odd half links that you get must work perfectly in giving you the right size. So all in all, let's step back and say, how would I define the overall look and build? I'd say it's formal, but it's not severe. There's obvious care and thought that's gone into the function, but by no means is this a stripped back to basics, Dirty Dozen style watch. There's a lot of, I'm not sure if I'd say there's fun in the watch, but there's certainly a lot of flair. And there is absolutely passion. Not the kind of passion that results in big flamboyant flourishes. We're not talking about a Frank Muhle crazy hour kind of watch here. But along this line, I've said a couple of times, it's the kind of passion you'd expect to see from a professional craftsman who really cares and persists in their polishing and their finishing of things like hands and indices long after other people would have just given up. That's kind of the feel I get from this watch. So with all that done, now how would I judge it? How do I think it meets the success criteria that the watchmaker was aiming for? Overall, I think they're super successful. The first thing is this watch just screams Muhle Glashutte. As I said, from that design, recalling the nautical instrument themes, the engineering of the movement and the case, and just the overall build. This watch is a really authentic rendition of what I think a Muhle Glashutte product should be. It's a precision instrument coming from a brand that is serious about what it does. But on top of that, we've got to remember Muhle Glashutte had other aims for this watch than to be just a simple nautical instrument. Remember that whole idea of luxury SUV and balancing rugged sportiness and elegance. Again, I think it did really, really well. That flair that you'd expect of a luxury 4x4 has come through in the dial, in the indices, in the hands, and even little touches around the case all elevate the watch out of kind of basic bare bones tooliness and instead makes it something that, yes, you can wear on the tools in the workshed, or you can wear it under a suit cuff in a board meeting, or there's just enough sort of fun that you can wear it with shorts and t-shirt by the pool. And I think in that case, given that you can do all of those things and do them very well, they've achieved their aim of being an SUV of a watch. So finally, putting aside the success in meeting what they wanted, is it something that I would want? Well, it's my watch. I bought it and I've lived with it and I love it. So the answer is pretty obvious. Some things I would point out is, in some ways you look at this watch and you think that it has gone down a well-trod path for a modern luxury tool watch or a modern sports watch. The steel-cased blue dial sports watch, particularly with an integrated or semi-integrated bracelet, is kind of a cliche in 2021. But before getting carried away, remember this watch came out in the year 2000. This watch came out 15 years before that trope, before that cliche became something, a bandwagon everyone was jumping on. It might not be original, but you can hardly accuse this watch of cheating and copying other people. It's very much an authentic expression of what the company was trying to achieve. I'd also say the watch is quintessentially German, which is something I really love about it. I think there's no coincidence that this looks a lot like another quintessentially German sports watch, the A. Lange & Söhne Odysseus. But again, before we get carried away, remember that this watch came out 20 years before the Odysseus. Now, that is not for an instant to say that I think that A. Lange & Söhne were even influenced by this watch. I suspect they might not have even known it existed. Rather that, like the A. Lange & Söhne, the Muhle Glashutte really encapsulates, expresses and articulates in a really clear and concise way that kind of quintessentially German Glashutte take on a watch at all. So putting aside all the stuff about where the watch fits and wider Muhle Glashutte aims, for me, the M99 City is simply a really lovely watch. That core tool basis imposes a certain discipline in forms and shapes and finishes that are really solid, but then it's layered with real flair. The striking blue dial works really well as a watch colorway, which lots of companies have known. The mirror polish of the hands and the indices do mean that relatively small, discreet, and quite delicate looking components achieve a really outsized effect. I think the semi-integrated bracelet was a mistake. I think it does muck up the looks a little bit, and it also compromises the long-term viability, particularly of watches with a band. I would say that you can live with it, and if you're happy cutting and pasting your own strap mods, it will work. I would also note, though, I think this is the last watch that Muhle Glashutte actually used that design, that approach with. Now, everything I've said would be really easy to achieve in a $10,000 watch, and companies do. that this watch costs a tenth of that is to me an amazing achievement. At this price, I think Muhle Glashutte achieved something really outstanding. So overall, what would I say? Look, the watch isn't perfect. It's got a couple of little glitches, the main one being that bracelet attachment. But on the other hand, what watch is perfect? I think that this is a brilliant little watch. I absolutely love it. And if this is your style of watch, if this is the kind of thing you like, this watch and other watches from Muhle Glashutte should absolutely be on your radar. So that was it, my critique of the Muhle Glashutte M99 City. I feel this is a really remarkable watch, considering this is the first time Muhle Glashutte has tried to do anything like this. They just knocked it out of the park. I absolutely love this watch. The greatest shame is that you can't buy this one anymore. The best news is Muhle Glashutte is still doing really well. Lots of really interesting new stuff on the market, and I could not recommend highly enough that you check them out. Would you buy them? I don't know. That's up to you. But if you go through life not knowing they're there, not having looked at them, there's every chance you're going to miss out. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. If you did, like and subscribe. You know what? Even if you didn't, like and subscribe anyway. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.